My name is Corinne Vega. I'm 28, a former Army MP, and these days I work private security for a firm called Sentinel North. Tonight I wasn't supposed to be on duty. I was supposed to be just another guest at my father's wedding. Still, I had my eyes on every door because habits like that don't go away. The televisions mounted above the bar were meant to show a slideshow of smiling faces. Instead, the screen flickered and filled with grainy footage from the restaurant's own cameras. There I was, captured, mid-motion, locking a man's wrist and driving him into the ground, a pistol clattering out of reach. The room went still. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Someone whispered, "That's her." The guard. My father's face shifted as he turned toward the screen, then toward me. For once, he didn't call me just a security guard. He didn't call me anything at all. His silence pressed heavier than applause, heavier than fear. I felt the sting of the bandage hidden under my sleeve, the pulse that still hadn't slowed. I hadn't come here to be noticed. But now everyone was watching, waiting for an explanation the footage couldn't give. I met my father's eyes. Words rose, then died in his throat. Between us hung everything we'd never said. His doubts, my anger, the years of distance. The story had caught up with us both, looping endlessly on a television above a half-empty dance floor. The night had started like any other wedding banquet. Music spilled from the speakers, waiters wove between tables, balancing trays of steak and wine, and my father held court like a man who had earned the right to be celebrated. He moved from group to group, shaking hands, laughing too loudly. I stayed near the edges, comfortable in shadows. When someone asked what I did, he answered for me. "She's just a security guard," he said, smiling as though it were harmless. That single word just sank like a stone. I knew he thought he was keeping expectations low, sparing me the embarrassment of explaining a job he didn't respect. But to me, it sounded like erasure. I had arrived early under the excuse of helping Sentinel North double-check the exits. Technically, I wasn't on shift, but large events always came up short on staff. I walked the stairwells, tested door handles, and checked fire extinguishers. It was my ritual, my way of carving order out of chaos. My father never noticed. He was too busy making sure his tie sat straight. Back inside, the air smelled of garlic and butter. A boy in a bow tie shivered near the window, too small for the draft sneaking through. I slipped off my jacket, draped it around him, and he bolted back to the dessert table with a grin. The gesture steadied me. Protecting people even in quiet ways was why I chose this work. My mind drifted to mornings at Fort Leonard Wood, boots striking pavement at dawn, my lungs burning as I carried packs heavier than my frame suggested. The Army had taught me to stand firm, to keep the person beside me safe, no matter the conditions. Leaving that life didn't strip the lesson away. It only redirected it. My father never understood. He wanted me behind a desk in a suit, climbing ladders he could brag about. He thought standing at doors was beneath me. He said it was a dead end, not realizing how alive it made me feel. As the speeches began, I took my usual position near the wall, eyes roaming. Most people laughed, swayed with glasses raised. But 3 men didn't fit. Their suits were heavier than the weather required. One tapped his finger in a rhythm too precise, another scanned doorways instead of faces. When the kitchen door swung, I saw one slip inside with a nod. I pressed the earpiece in my ear and whispered for Caden, my coworker covering the venue tonight. His voice sharpened as I described them. "Not on the list. Keep them in sight." I did, even as servers brushed past with trays and the crowd applauded the newlyweds. I leaned into the shadows, steadying my breath. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they were restless cousins. But when one pulled a marker from his pocket and scribbled something onto a napkin, before tucking it away, my stomach knotted. The music slowed into a waltz, couples filling the dance floor. My father led his bride with a proud smile, cameras flashing. To anyone else, it was perfect. To me, it was a set piece balanced on the edge of collapse. I clenched my fists, every instinct telling me the night was about to split open. From my corner near the bar, I had a clear line toward the rear corridor. 2 of the suited men drifted that way, trying too hard to look casual. One tugged on gloves that had no place at a wedding. The other kept checking the dock door, scribbling a number onto the back of his hand before glancing toward the stage. My pulse quickened. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I slid closer, pretending to help a server steady her tray of champagne flutes. The glasses rattled against each other, a thin chime swallowed by the music. When I eased into the corridor, I caught sight of them again. They weren't carrying coats or phones. They were mapping exits. Caden's voice came through my earpiece tight now. 2 at the dock, 1 still in the kitchen. Back up en route if this goes south. I pressed myself against the wall, careful not to draw attention. The kitchen doors swung open, releasing the hiss of sauté pans and a wave of onion and garlic. For a moment, everything looked to ordinary cooks, barking orders, a dishwasher, lugging trays. But behind them, near the prep counter, the third man adjusted a heavy bag at his feet. He didn't belong. I turned back to the hall. My father was laughing mid-story, raising his glass as if nothing in the world could touch him. I felt a strange pang he wanted me invisible, yet here I was, seeing what he refused to. A child darted past me, chasing a balloon, and almost collided with one of the men as he re-entered the hall. The man stiffened, then forced a smile before sliding back toward his partners. The balloon bobbed away, the boy oblivious. I whispered into the mic, "They're sinking. Something's about to happen." The chandeliers above cast a warm glow, the kind meant to soften faces in photographs. But under that glow, the 3 men shifted like shadows that didn't match the light. One touched his earpiece. Another nodded once. The leader brushed his jacket aside, just enough for me to glimpse the shape at his hip, a weapon hidden but ready. My body responded before my mind could catch up, shoulders squared, muscles coiled, focus narrowing. Years of drills had wired me for this, but nothing could quiet the thought of my father still smiling, still unaware of the storm rolling toward him. I edged closer to the kitchen, telling myself to wait for the right second, but waiting too long could mean chaos spilling across the dance floor. I flexed my fingers, whispering to Caden, "Be ready. They're moving now." The first crash came like thunder. A bottle exploded against the floor, shards scattering under the feet of dancers. Screams rose as the music cut mid-beat. One of the men pulled a pistol, waving it above the crowd. "Phones down." "Nobody move," he barked. The room convulsed with panic. Guests dropped behind chairs, clutching one another. A man near the stage puffed his chest as if he might charge, but his trembling hands betrayed him. I pressed him down by the shoulder, whispering, "Stay put, don't make it worse." Then I heard a cry. A server had slipped on the glass and gone down hard. When she lifted her hand, blood streamed from a deep slice along her wrist. Her eyes filled with terror, more afraid of bleeding out than of the gunfire that might follow. Training took over. I tore a strip from the table runner and dropped to my knees beside her. "Hold still," I murmured, wrapping the cloth tight. She gasped, but the bleeding slowed. Around us, the crowd surged and pressed, desperate for space. There was no way to move through without forcing them aside. I raised my voice sharp and clear. "Medic, let me through." The word carried weight. People instinctively stepped back, parting enough for me to haul her toward the kitchen doors. They didn't question who I was. The word alone opened a path. For once, a lie wasn't deceit. It was survival. In the kitchen, I settled her on a stool, pressing gauze from the first aid kit into her palm. "Stay here until help comes," I told her. She nodded, trembling. Then I pulled on a pair of gloves, steadied my breathing, and turned back toward the door. Through its small window, I saw the leader stalking closer to the stage, his weapon low and ready. My father stood only feet away, smiling oblivious. The 2 worlds, celebration and threat, were about to collide. The leader moved toward the stage pistol, angled low, his voice slicing through the hall. "Stay down! Don't be stupid!" Guests cowered beneath tables, the air thick with fear. My father stood frozen by the head table, a wine glass in his hand, as if the night hadn't shifted into something deadly. I slid along the edge of the crowd, staying low, weaving between overturned chairs. Caden's voice crackled faintly in my ear. "Back up 3 minutes out. Hold tight." 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. Lives could end before the first siren even reached the curb. The leader's attention flicked to the stack of purses and wrapped gifts beside the stage. He gestured to one of his men to collect them, adjusting his grip on the pistol as he turned. That tiny shift, just enough to loosen his wrist, was the opening. I surged forward. His eyes widened too late. My hand clamped around his wrist, twisting hard as I dropped my weight. Bone ground against bone. The pistol slipped free and clattered across the floor. Gasps erupted through the room as chairs screeched and toppled. He swung with his free hand, knuckles grazing my jaw, but I drove my knee into his ribs, forcing him down. "Stay down," I barked, my voice sharp as the crack of a whip. Caden was there in a flash, dropping onto the man's back, cinching a zip tie around his wrists until plastic bit deep. For a flicker of a second, relief spread across the hall. My father's voice broke raw and startled Corinne. He had never said my name like that before, like he needed me. But the moment didn't last. A scream tore from the kitchen. I spun toward the sound just as another man dragged the young busboy into view, a kitchen knife pressed against the boy's throat. His eyes were wide, begging. The leader thrashed under Caden's weight, spitting curses, but he was contained. The real danger had shifted behind the kitchen doors. My chest burned, blood dripping warm from the cut on my wrist, but there was no time to think of pain. I pushed to my feet and sprinted toward the kitchen, knowing this fight was far from finished. The kitchen door swung shut behind me, sealing off the murmur of terrified guests. Inside, the air smelled of onions and steel. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and cold. The man had the busboy locked in front of him, knife pressed so tight to the boy's throat that a thin line of white showed on his skin. The kid's breath came in shallow bursts, his eyes wide and pleading. "Stay back," the man snarled, his voice breaking. Sweat ran down his face, darkening his collar. He wasn't calm, he was cornered. That made him dangerous. I lifted my hand slowly. "Easy," I said, my voice low and steady. "You don't want this. Let him go." He barked a bitter laugh. "You think you're in charge here?" He pressed the knife harder. The boy whimpered. I locked my gaze on him. "You keep that kid. The cops outside won't talk. You let him go. You've got a chance to live through this." For a beat, he wavered, eyes flicking toward the small window in the door, where red and blue lights strobed faintly. I shifted just enough to slide my hand along the counter behind me, fingers curling around the lid of a steel pan. He shouted, jerking the knife. "Don't move." I slammed the lid against the prep table, the clang echoing like a gunshot. He flinched. That heartbeat of hesitation was enough. I lunged, grabbing his wrist, twisting the blade down. The busboy dropped to the floor and scrambled out of reach. The knife clattered across the tile. I wrenched a dish towel around the man's arm, pulling tight, forcing him chest first into the counter. His grunt filled the air, his strength draining under the hold. Through the door window, I saw flashing lights flood the hall. The police had arrived. But in this kitchen, the fight ended with my weight pinning him to cold steel. The kitchen door burst open, and uniforms poured in, voices layered with commands. "Hands where we can see them. Drop it." I lifted my arms, stepping back so they could see the man already pinned and disarmed. Within seconds, they swarmed him, cuffing hard, hauling him out across the tiles. The busboy clung to one officer, sobbing into his chest. I sank against the counter, the adrenaline draining so fast my knees trembled. My wrist throbbed, blood seeping through the gauze, but I pressed it tighter and kept quiet. An EMT brushed past to check the server I'd bandaged. She gave me a shaky nod that said more than thank you. Detectives fired questions at me, sharp and quick. How many suspects, where they moved, what I'd seen. I answered like I was still on the job, my voice flat, details rolling out one after another. They took photos of my hands, the rip in my sleeve, the smudge of blood on the prep table. A sergeant asked if I wanted a hospital visit. I shook my head. He didn't argue, just told me to get the cut cleaned properly and sign 2 more forms. When I stepped into the reception hall again, the chandeliers were dimmed, the music long dead. Guests clustered in corners, whispering, their eyes huge. My father stood off to the side, his new wife gripping his arm. He didn't come toward me. He just stared as though he didn't know which version of me had walked out of that kitchen. At the precinct time, folded into fluorescent hours. I gave my statement twice, once to uniforms, and again to detectives in a quieter room that smelled like stale coffee. Caden popped his head in with a lopsided grin that didn't quite land. "You good?" he asked. I said yes. It felt easier than explaining the noise in my chest. By the time they released me, dawn smeared gray across the river. My father had gone home without a word. I walked to my car alone, the city hushed in that strange hour where night hasn't decided to give up. It wasn't until the next morning that the story hit local news. Grainy footage looped on, repeat my hand on a gun wrist, the twist, the fall. The anchor called me a former military police officer turned private security specialist. My phone lit with messages from colleagues and two numbers I didn't recognize, one probably a reporter. Not from my father. 24 hours later, an email from Milwaukee PD thanked me formally. That afternoon, the restaurant manager left a voicemail offering to comp a brunch for the staff who'd been there. Recognition came in measured steps, a line in an email, a clip on TV, a stranger's voicemail. It was enough to prove the night had been real. It wasn't enough to answer the silence I'd carried home. 2 days later, my phone rang. My father's voice sounded different, stripped of its usual certainty. "Come have brunch with me," he said. No explanation, just that. We met at a diner by the river, the kind with vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone sweetheart. The smell of bacon and coffee hung thick in the air. I slid into the booth across from him. For once, he wasn't in a suit. Just a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, his old watch still stained with grease. He looked less like the man who always knew better, and more like someone trying to figure out how to begin. Coffee arrived before either of us ordered. He wrapped both hands around his mug, cleared his throat, then fumbled with the laminated menu. "You did good," he muttered. "The cops said you kept people calm, that you saved that kid." The words sounded awkward, like tools he wasn't used to holding. I stirred cream into my coffee, eyes fixed on the swirl. "It's my job," I said. He shook his head quickly. "No, it's more than a job." His eyes met mine. "I thought if you had a shiny title, people would respect you without question. I didn't see that you already had something better. I didn't see what I was doing to you." The waitress set down our plates, pancakes melting with butter for me, eggs, and bacon for him. He didn't pick up his fork. He just waited. "You wanted me safe," I said finally. "You thought standing at doors meant I'd never move forward. But this is what I chose. I don't protect buildings. I protect people." That night wasn't about proving you wrong. It was about doing what I know I'm meant to do. He pushed his eggs around the plate. "I called you just a guard, because I thought I was shielding you from disappointment. But I was the one disappointing you, wasn't I?" I set my fork down. The honesty in his voice disarmed me more than any weapon I'd faced that night. "I don't need you to brag about me," I said. "I just need you to see me, to call me what I am." His face softened. "My daughter keeps people safe. That's who you are." The words weren't loud. They didn't echo. But they carried further than any applause. The check came. He reached for it as always, but I slipped a 20 under the plate for the tip. He noticed, gave a small nod, and let it be. Outside, the river gleamed in the pale sunlight. We walked side by side, not ahead or behind. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The silence felt less like distance and more like possibility. The following Friday, I was back on shift at the north gate of the stadium. Wind whipped off the lake, carrying the smell of popcorn, and spilled beer from the food trucks along the curb. Fans streamed past in jerseys and hoodies, laughing, pushing through turnstiles. None of them knew me. None of them needed to. I adjusted my stance, radio clipped to my shoulder, scanning faces the way I always did. The bandage around my wrist was thin, now more memory than wound. Every person who passed trusted without thinking that someone was watching the doors. Tonight, that someone was me. A man in a faded cap patted his pockets, realized he'd dropped his tickets, and panic flashed across his face. I pointed to where they had slipped beneath the stanchion rope, stepped over, handed them back. He exhaled, sheepish. "Thanks," he said, already moving. The moment was small and ordinary, but it landed with a familiar weight. People stumbled into safety, all the time without knowing who steadied them. My father's words lingered from brunch. "My daughter keeps people safe." Simple and plain truer than anything he had ever said about me. Between security checks, I pulled out my phone and found a text from him that I hadn't noticed earlier. Proud of you. Drive safe after shift. No flourishes, no speeches. Enough. A little girl skipped by holding her mother's hand. She glanced up, smiled, and tugged toward the entrance. That fleeting smile felt like its own medal. I wasn't just filling space beside a door, I was making the walk inside lighter, safer. The stadium lights flared, the crowd roared, and I drew a deeper breath. I didn't need headlines or applause. I had the work, the scar, the text on my screen, and the truth. If anyone still called me just a security guard, I could live with that, because I knew what I was. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.